Hi, everybody. This is D.A. Murray coming to you from Chicago. And I could not be more excited about this live event. As many of you know, I have focused on really engaging with readers and understanding what they're reading, why they're reading what they're reading. And I think that what I've been able to do over the last, I'd say maybe few years, is really dive into something beyond that, the writer journey. And I am so excited to have my guest here, who is an incredible, incredible author. And I have to tell you something up front. I actually met her last year in Greece when I went to a writer's retreat. So, for those of you who are writers, are thinking about writing, maybe put it down and want to put it back up, wherever you are in that journey, I highly, highly recommend a writer's experience, somewhere where you can really, share your ideas and really work on your craft, because I think it's an amazing way to really do better with your writing, but also make some incredible relationships. So I'm starting here today with Judy Ellis, who, like I said, amazing author. And I am really excited to have her here to talk about her journey and share a little bit about what she's learned and where she's going on her journey here as author, and many other things I know that she's got going on. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Judy Ellis. And Judy, I think the main thing everybody wants to know is, tell us about, kind of what inspired you to write. Where did you really, I think, get that, that burning desire and then continue to evolve it?
Sure. Well, first of all, D.A. Murray, from me, it's a pleasure to be here. I am so glad to be with you, and it was phenomenal to hang out with you and other writers in Greece. That was a once in a lifetime, but hope we get to do it again. How,
Absolutely.
how did I do this? How did I get started? Well, I basically was a kid. I would say like my preteen years, and it was inspired by reading and it was inspired by movies. My dad was a big movie buff, and my mother made sure we were in the library. So
Mhm.
those two things kind of worked together. And I read a lot of books, and I happened to be at that time into gothic novels, suspense novels, harlequin romances. I read anything I could read. And I was the
Right.
kid when I went to my grandmother's house, and if there was nothing to do, there was a corner drugstore where they would sell the little books, and my grandmother would look at me and say, "Judy Lynn, do you want some money?" And I would say, "Yeah," and I would run and go and buy a paperback. And I
Right.
would read it and I would watch the films, and that led to me wanting to imitate. And
Hmm.
so I imitated the works that I saw. So some of my first writings were about, the woman in front of the dark castle, kind of thing, running away, and, the sullen hero who actually turns out to be a good guy, you know, all that like the Heathcliff vibe, a lot.
Yeah, of course. One of my favorite, Wuthering Heights,
That's
can't
right.
help it.
Right.
Well, I have to tell you, Judy, I really, really admire the fact that you discovered your passion and your talent early, and you pursued a path, a career path that really aligned very well with what you eventually obviously evolved into. I'll tell you why I really appreciate it. I have always loved writing and reading. But honestly, I probably spent the first, 15 or so years of my career in business. I wasn't writing, and I think that I was looking for a way to kind of fill that void of creativity,
Mhm.
so it's not too shocking. I think that I'm a marketer, but I think at the same time, it was really important for me to find my way back to the thing that really made me happy. And
Absolutely.
writing definitely did that for me.
Absolutely. I think
Uh,
we find their paths because I ended up, I had my best friend in high school. She encouraged me to actually go straight for the novel, thing, but I didn't do it. Um, he did. And then I ended up in journalism, but I think
yes.
it's it was a great path for me to take. One, I met some phenomenal colleagues, but also too, I met a lot of amazing people, and I was in a lot of places that became historical moments. So that was a blessing. But that was great for me as a novelist, and when I became a novelist, because I knew about research and I knew
Mhm.
about certain details, and you could pull to your mind all the things you had seen, during that career. So it was a good path. But sometimes I do wonder what would happen if I had gone straight from college
Yeah.
to being a
No, I
working
get.
writer. Yeah.
I have to say, one of the most common questions that I get from people all the time is, the desire to want to write, but how do you stay with it, right? Or in some cases, how do you start? So I'm really curious to know, maybe, how did you really start to piece together this idea of your first novel?
I think it began before the beginning, and let me explain. Even
Hmm.
while I was a journalist, I was trying to write on the side, but I was always divided because you had work. I remember writing my first screenplay is really what I wrote when I left the newspaper I was at the time, and I wrote a screenplay, and I really liked the expression. It was something different. But by the time I got to this book, which is about almost 18 years now, two things had happened. I was recently married, and one night I had this idea about seven gates, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then one of my best girlfriends down in Texas, she had started to do some Bible study. Her name is Riona Martin. She's with Riona Martin Ministries. If anybody wants to look her up. And she started talking about this strange story in Genesis 6, which basically talks about the Nephilim. And I said, hey, girl, would love to do a fantasy novel piggybacking on your research. Are we cool? Can I do that? And she was game. So she did the biblical research and found a lot of great stuff from that. And then I wanted to do a fantasy story inspired by that. And so what kept us going over the years is the research, because it took us back to the book of Genesis. It took us through a lot of um, understand the Hebrew. It's a lot of things that we did, but Genesis is where it started. So that's kind of how I got started. And to sustain it, one, it
Mhm.
was her. One, it was my husband encouraged me at times, but also it was my dad, my late dad, that
Mhm.
he really encouraged me, particularly after I finished book one, to keep writing.
I'm curious, has your writing style kind of changed over the years at all?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
Going back to my girlfriend in high school, she actually told me one time, "I think you wrote better in high school than you did," uh, because journalism put a whole different pattern. Then, after being a reporter and being an editor, then you write differently from there. When I got to the first book, it was like starting all over again. You had
Yeah.
to find another voice.
Mhm.
Personally, the first book, I love the story, but I'm not as crazy about the writing. I never seem to be able to rewrite it in the way I want to. The other two books, I think, is how I evolve more. And I think
Mhm.
the fourth book is where I think I'll really feel comfortable.
Oh, fantastic. So there is a fourth book
Yes.
coming. Oh.
Yes.
And will it be in the same genre, or kind of
Yes.
where you?
Yes,
Okay.
it'll be a continuation of the series.
Continuation? Oh,
Mhm.
that's fantastic. That's
Mhm.
fantastic.
Mhm.
And I mean, what's the best advice in writing that you've ever received?
It was from a journalist when I was in high school. And
Mhm.
he basically said to look at others. He did not say steal, plagiarize. He said, look at the form of writing that they're doing.
Yeah.
What did you like about it? So in that case, there's like looking at the lead, looking at the verbs, how they did their nut graphs, all that. But I still think that was good advice, because you should look at the stories that inspire you. Or
Mhm.
movies inspire me a lot. And so you say, what kind of movie? I am a sword and sandal girl. That's what I like. I
Yeah.
love them. And so you look at how they're made, what makes them a good story, and what makes them kind of fail as a story. So that was the best advice I ever got, to kind of see it. But then I think only addendum I would make to it is that once you see the form, bring you to that, and then it becomes yours. Then it's not imitation. it becomes your voice. Shape it as you would like to do the story.
No, and I think that makes sense too, because you know, you definitely, want to be able to be authentic, right? And I think your readers can really tell, um, can tell that right off the bat, the authenticity of your voice in your story.
Thank you.
Um, this is a really interesting question that we have from Jamil. He says, Judy, I didn't know you wrote a screenplay. Would you consider converting your books to a movie or a series?
I would love to. And in fact, I did write a screenplay for book one. And so I would actually, the book feels like books, but I think they will make great movies. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you were writing, were you writing with the idea of seeing this on the big screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
That's how I write as well.
I have a film in my head. That's where I am. And I don't know about you, Dominique, but I actually have music. I play epic music, no words. I'm talking about the sweeping desert kind of thing.
Oh,
That's what I do.
yes.
That puts me in a place. And then to my husband's chagrin and my dog can't stand it, I'll loop the same song if I'm in a certain place with it, because that's the sweep of what I'll usually see while I'm writing through that music.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. So, shifting gears a little bit, I think one of the things that's so exciting, I think, about the publishing industry, Judy, is that it really has become a lot more diverse in terms of the paths that authors can take. And so, I'd love to get your point of view about, when you thought about, releasing your first book or your second book or even your third book, was there anything, key considerations you may have had about how you wanted to bring your book into the world, and how did you make that choice?
Well, sure, it would be great to be called up by a traditional publisher, and I have full respect for the publishing industry. It was one of my dreams at one point, and it still kind of is. I wouldn't mind being an editor in the traditional public and actually to bring in new authors. I think that comes from my experience as an editor, where I like looking at stories. But
Mhm.
as an editor, I know about the power of being a gatekeeper, because you made the decisions about what stories were printed, what press releases you accepted. And
Yeah.
so when I started the books, I didn't have anybody knocking at my door. I remember a friend of mine I was working with at the time, I guess using the role of an agent. We actually were trying to sell the book as a screenplay. He said, "Oh, no one is interested in Sword and Sandal for that group." But part of the problem was a part of the challenge for him, I guess, is the fact that I have a diverse cast. Uh,
Mhm.
so my book is based on Genesis 10, which
Mhm.
a lot of all the people groups, if you have a biblical worldview, you know that the people groups came there, and so they were not just one group of people. And
Mhm.
so his gatekeeping was to say, I don't think anybody want to be in the market for a black man who's a lead, and is a sword and sandal flick. He couldn't get that. Now that's long before Black Panther. That's
Yeah.
long before
Yep.
the kind of movie. But at that time, he
Yeah.
was doing gatekeeping. So my thought was, I'll just write what I like, and I have always done that, is to write what I like. And when I have a couple of besties, when I write, I kind of write for that circle. Fiona's one of them. And the thing is that when they get excited about the story, if they feel the way I felt about it, that those are my super fans. And if I can increase that organically, or and now I'm at a point in my life I need to intentionally try to reach them organically.
Yeah.
That's the way you should do it. Now, again, if someone sees it and they want to do a movie, they want to, put it up in, a publishing house, so be it. But I think the idea of ownership at this
Yeah.
time, I think, is so important. We
Yeah.
can own our content. We can deliver it however we want to deliver it, whatever format we want to do it. And there's so many audiences on the ground who may never go into places where we sell books. You may sell them in different places. So
No, you're absolutely right. And I think, even with the advent of AI and the concern that, our content, our original content can very easily be leveraged
Mm-hmm.
to drive, machine learning, to drive a broader
Mm-hmm.
context of usage in that technology. And while I don't have a problem with trying to advance technology, I also think as a writer, of original content, I want to be compensated for, the content, like the content that I write, and I think that's, a pretty well understood point of view. So I think it's really interesting to see how this topic is going to evolve over time, because I think it's very, very relevant.
Absolutely. I mean, since you mentioned AI, just to take a little detour, I think that's important. We can't outrun what's happening with technology, but I do think we can leverage it in ways we may never have imagined. And I think
Yeah.
part of that is your creative agency. The more you are yourself with
Hmm.
your content, that's the way to do it. I see AI is different AI things that you can do as tools to
Hmm.
achieve my goals. It cannot write my novel because it
Yeah.
doesn't do everything my novel does.
Right.
But if I'm not mad if anybody wants to do that, but that's not the way that I generate an idea. Now,
Yeah.
if it wants to help me with something with that, but the creator, if you will, lower C, the creator who's doing the content, that would be me. That would not be artificial intelligence.
No,
Um,
I 100%,
so, yeah.
100% agree. It's funny, as a debut author, one of the things that I think about regularly, quite honestly, more than I would care to, is the level of vulnerability that I'm putting out there. I think anybody who is expressing a talent, a skill, what have you, and putting it out there for the world to judge, that's a very intimidating thing. And so I think one of the things that I've had to tell myself is, listen, this is my authentic self. This is my story. And I think it's a great story, but there's a lot of people who thinks, their story is great, and some people are going to love it and some people aren't, and that's okay. But I think that idea of exposing a part of yourself to the world to be judged can be a very intimidating aspect.
I think it's true, and I think it's always been true for writers.
Yeah.
We just have platforms and we have more means to actually distribute a book. But I think it was tough for Shakespeare. I think it was tough for Dickens. I think it was tough for people in the Black Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance. I just think it's always been hard because it's a part of yourself. But I think what we can learn is that our gifts are ours. They're
Hmm.
our personal um, signature, if you will,
Hmm.
on the world.
Hmm.
And a book is that. And
Yeah.
I've just come to the conclusion that after doing a book launch or hearing feedback from friends, everybody's not into what you're into. Everybody's not into what you and I are into. They don't necessarily want to see sci-fi fantasy. They like true crime. Okay, fine. So and that's fine. But they love story, but they may not look like this aspect of a story or this genre of a story, and that's
Hmm.
okay. I think we need to accept that and still come with our authentic selves and say, "I'm going to produce something," and there are super fans out there who are looking just for this.
You're absolutely right. And I think the other thing that's really happening is a lot of the mashup that's happening with genres now, romantasy, or, this whole idea of, folks really taking a different spin. I mean, I'm a speculative author. And so, I look at a lot of the traditional tropes that are out there for dystopia. But I think that at the end of the day, as a writer, nobody's going to tell the story the way I'm going to tell it,
That's right.
right?
Right.
And so, and that can mean so many things: the characters, the point of view, the tension, the pace. There's so many aspects of storytelling that really do engage the reader and drive them to some sort of a way to think about something differently than they probably didn't think about before, And so, one of the things I'm really hoping to do is for people to read this book, Dominion, and really sit down and say, you know what, let's talk about this. Because there's really some pretty, meaty topics of discussion here that we can have. I think one of the things that came up, and we got another question, um, provide suggestions on marketing for a self published author. So,
Well, I think you're in a better because
Yeah.
you've done amazing. I need to catch up.
Well, I don't know how amazing it is, but what I will say is, I would say one of the key things is it's never too early to start putting your perspective out there. And whether it is interviewing folks and getting their point of view, whether it is doing book reviews, whether it is really, touring the world and talking about the historical impact, on certain books. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can engage a reader and a writer. And
Yes.
so, what I did in my particular journey is I started engaging with an audience several years before I even got to the point where I was ready to publish my book. And that was just having the perspective of, well, by the time I do launch it, I'm going to need an audience. So I think having that, but let's put that aside for a moment. Let's just say, for example, you're starting at ground zero, and you're
Mhm.
trying to figure out kind of what do you do and how do you really dial in. I think to the earlier point about being authentic and making sure that what you are putting out there for others is something that is really does represent you, and what and the type of impact that you want to have through your written word, your spoken word. So I think that being authentic is one piece of it. I think the other thing from a marketing standpoint, if you're a self-published author, I think you really do have to network and engage with other authors, influencers, people who can really help you kind of aggregate and build a groundswell of support, for not just your work, but also you as an author. That's your brand, right? And so I think that that's another huge part of, kind of how do you really start to connect the dots. Now, if you want to ask questions about, hey, what are some of the things that you're doing to try to manage all of this? Yes, I have social media channels. Absolutely. I have HubSpot. And so, when I'm driving my email, I want to be able to understand what's going on with the performance of a lot of my outreach. So I'm doing those types of things. But I think the main thing really over the last year has really been about networking and meeting people like you, Judy, meeting publishers, meeting consultants, meeting, obviously just a lot of people who are really engaged in uplifting, my experience, and I can do the same for them.
Excellent. I think it's excellent. Only thing I would add is that use your family, use your
Oh,
friends for the idea of being your beta readers. Use them repeatedly because they will see things. Because to me, I did a course. I've created a course about getting your super fans, and I don't deal with
yeah.
marketing, but I deal with the story you should create in your mind as you write as a self-published author, or even if you write for traditional publishing, should be someone you're looking at. That this is
Mm-hmm,
them. That avatar, somehow you should create that person. My friends were like that.
mm-hmm,
Fiona Martin, Judy Horton. And then this
mm-hmm.
one gentleman wrote me out the blue and said, I read your books and please don't stop writing. And
Uh,
so the thing is, they became beta readers. They became people
mm,
who they would, because they were in my mind when I wrote. They got what I was trying to say. And so as a self-published author, I think when you get that crew that basically says, we get it, they
yeah,
become your super fans. They tell others, but also too, they will give you almost like, not that you need any validating, um, but they will validate your authenticity, and you can take that out into the world and do the networking and do the thing with the influencers. You can start talking about it because you know that your book or books mean something to someone else. And I think that's so key in terms of starting out as a self publisher. You're not writing into the void, you're
mm-hmm.
writing for someone. And there's so many of them, you just don't know where they are yet, but at least find the few first.
No, I think that makes 100%. And the thing is, you went down the self-publishing route. I went down a hybrid publishing route.
Mhm.
And, I think I get a lot of questions from folks about, what is hybrid? How does that work? And so forth. And, I like to think of hybrid as something that is kind of the best of both worlds. It kind of sits in that middle between self-publishing and traditional publishing. I know that when I was actually looking for a publisher, probably about a year or so ago, there are a few, I think there were just a few stark realities that I wasn't really ready to deal with. Number one was that there was a backlog of manuscripts up to about a year and a half to 2 years
Oh,
in terms of getting your work out there. That was a big deal for me because I wanted to get my work out as soon as possible. And I'm telling you, honestly, I'm so glad that I did, because what is happening right now in our country is so critically, intertwined with some of the themes that I was writing about, 4 years ago. And so the timing of it, I think, is really is a great piece of it. And I think the other piece of it was I really looked at the business, the economics of writing. And I went through, I looked at the whole P&L and I said, well, wow, look at look at, from a traditional publisher standpoint, my ability to earn is going to be, less potentially from on a per book basis than, if I was, had more control over not only the pricing and the cost structure of my novel, but also the fact that I had invested so much on the marketing side and saying, you know what, I think I got this part. I don't need to have this additional layer baked in. And at that point, what agents were telling me was that, a lot of publishing companies aren't putting a lot of dollars into marketing, at least not someone who is not already known, right? I mean, I'm sure if I was, somebody famous or, a celebrity of sorts, it would possibly be a different story to some degree. But I just felt like the economics, I felt the timing of when I needed to get my book out were all incredibly, incredibly critical pieces. But I would also say there's a lot of publishing companies out there that are vanity publishers. And you have to be very careful about companies that just reach out to you and say, hey, we can publish your book. And it sounds great, but the reality is that it's just that it's a vanity publisher. They'll publish your book, they'll put it in a box, ship it to you and say, hey, have a nice day.
but you know,
So it's different.
it's different. But I really admire the approach you took in terms of hybrid. But I also really like you looking at the economics of how you could make that scale, how you could make that work for you and get the profit that you want to. Because I have heard about authors who are not getting support marketing wise, and that was a huge investment. And you should get a return on investment that you made into your work. So to me, whatever choice an author makes, they should see, how am I going to get back from what I put in it?
Yeah,
Although you don't do it for money, but the thing is, to keep doing it, you need money. So it does
absolutely.
have a role to play, right? But I like you looking at it from that. And in fact, you sound like how I would like to sound to the person who asked a question about film. If I ever got in front of a producer, those are the kind of things, or a production company, those are the kind of things I will be talking about.
Yes.
Whether it's not just, you just take this and I no longer have a part in it. I would want a part in it. I would like to look at the casting. I would like to do it, all of it. If you want the dream, then the dreamer must be there in the room to make sure it happens as she saw it.
No, you're absolutely right with that, Judy. And you can't, there's just no substitute, I think, for being really clear about what's the end goal. Because I get that question a lot too. It's like, yeah, I want to be a writer, and that's fine, that's great. But at the end of the day, what do you want to do with that? And there's nothing wrong if you want to write, maybe you don't ever want to put it out there, or you want to write and it's a hobby of certain kinds. But if you want to make it a business, then you have to be about the business of understanding how you're going to make money.
Correct.
So this is really interesting. A question from Zelda Cummings. She said, She agrees that AI can generate content, but it cannot replicate creativity, authenticity, or voice. Similar to music, 100% agree, Zelda. Different singers can sing the same song but produce a different sound. Authentic voices penetrate the atmosphere differently, and it creates too much replication, not enough creation happening in a lot of areas.
I
So,
totally agree. And like I said, I know there's a, I'm not worried about it in that sense. People
mhm,
may always, there will always, put it this way, there will always be imitators. And I
mhm,
think AI can give you an imitation of a thing. You can
mhm,
say, I want my voice to sound like, Alice Walker. I want my voice to sound like,
mhm,
Hemingway. That's what you can do. You can say that. You could train, an AI agent to do that for you. Well, so be it. I
mhm.
think I think doing that loses part of the process of the beauty of creativity.
Yes.
Creativity is God's gift and it's never replicated completely the same. And so,
Yes.
even if you may say you want to look like Alice Walker, be like Toni Morrison, be like Hemingway, you will never be them. You won't completely be them. You will be whoever you are. And so
Mhm.
I think it's fool's gold to go after AI like it's going to make you a bunch of money for things that aren't true. Now there is a way to use AI where you can teach it to sound like you, but I don't need it to do that. That's not what
Mhm.
I need it for. I need it to come up with a funnel to make sure I sell my books. I need it to put it on platforms and get it to people. I want those tools. I don't need to say, like in my book, a lot of times when I had ideas, they would come, I might be in the shower and I was musing over how to fix that part of the story. And the
Yes.
Lord would drop into my spirit, okay, Shema needs to do X. And I couldn't wait to get out the shower so I could go in there and lay down. I don't need AI for that. It's not
I
necessary
agree.
for that. And I think also too, I would tell writers there's no scarcity, don't have a scarcity mindset about your own creativity. Once you're
Absolutely.
in that place, there's no need to fear that you can't come up with something else. One of the first things that happened to me when I published on one of the sites, Smashwords.
Mm.
I'm so green, I don't know what I was doing. And I saw someone actually take my rough, horrible copy and imitated my original documents. I'll never forget that. I said, "You just read my stuff." But did that stop me from writing The Gate of the Left? Nope. Did that? And I think so. One of the things that journalism taught you that we are not. It's no scarcity in me. The
Yeah.
stories will come from me. The way I spotted a story as a reporter may be different than 10 other reporters, and all of us are good, but
Mhm.
all of us may handle it differently. And we need to walk out of a place of abundance. And sometimes people are like, well, I can't write, but I want to write and I'll make a whole bunch of money. I
Mhm.
like to make money too, but that is not my first goal. My first goal is to be a storyteller. I believe
Mhm.
I have a story to tell about an ancient kingdom that sheds light on the book of Genesis to let you know it was a very multicultural world. And there's
Mhm.
things that were happening that are better than a lot of movies we see, and they were happening right within their pages.
Mhm.
So that's the idea I bring to the table. And I
Yeah.
think that's unique. And I'll keep on spinning off of that the more and more the Holy Spirit gives me something else. But there's no scarcity. So I don't have to go to AI for that.
Yeah.
AI can teach me things, but AI can't write for me.
Right. And to your point, the truth of the matter is that so many stories are just retellings or reimaginations of other stories consistently. I mean, I am in awe of some of the amazing works that are out there, that are just built on whether it's biblical stories,
Yes.
whether it's, things that have really evolved and become something completely different than when it was, maybe 50 years ago.
Yes.
And I think one of the things when I was writing my book, I thought to myself, well, wow, I wonder if people are just going to say, "Oh, this is a common trope in dystopia, or what have you." And then I started to realize, well, but nobody's telling the story the way I'm telling it.
That's it.
And this is a completely different reimagination of this world that I've created. And I started to kind of really take a step back and say, I'm actually proud of that. And what's really interesting now is that so many of the books that I'm seeing that are coming out in, speculative fiction, even in sci-fi to some degree, and thrillers, it's like, oh, this is like the Hunger Games. This is like Divergent. Everybody's kind of playing on those very, very successful tropes to kind of, I think, trying to really curtail or maybe give people a perspective of what to expect. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because there are a lot of people, even myself, and you and I have talked about this, that love those stories and would love to see more of them. The only problem is, you set an expectation, you better be able to deliver on it. So I think that's the thing, right? You start comparing yourself and thinking, well, hey, this is what you can anticipate, but people really have to feel that you're giving them something even above and beyond what they may anticipate.
Yeah, and I know that's a what is it? Tool, a way that publishers would do that, to
Yeah.
kind of compare the book. Everybody wants to find a box to put you in. But
Yeah.
increasingly, I hope the world will start looking at every story is its own and true. And I have to also say this: I do agree that there's nothing that's new in terms of stories in that sense. They
Yeah.
always fit, whether that's love or loss or adventure. These stories have been told, millennia. So that's not what's new. But you're right; it is our interpretation. But we keep trying to put it into a box in this current thing. And I'm not in a time of so many sequels. I would just love to see something that has not been done before, or
Yeah.
uh, it's an old trope. One of the things my husband often says, we should go back into the 40s and the 50s. There's some stories that were told that, now tell a new version of that and put different characters in it. So then it becomes a reinterpretation. But the point is that we make it our own. And
Yes.
and why can't we be fresh every time? We don't necessarily go into the box. And it is absolutely true that if we promise something in a story, then it should fulfill it. That's how you keep your super fans. Your super fans are going to be looking for something from you in your genre. So don't start doing something different, because they'll say, "But you said it was like," and then it's not. You know. And then if you said it was like a Hallmark kind of like love story, then they are supposed to get together in the end. This is
Yeah.
not. This is not what That's what's expected. That's the
Yeah.
promise you made when you said like the Hallmark movie.
Right. Or just romance,
Or
traditional
just romance
romance. And
period.
that's exactly how that ends up. And that's great, but to your point, you have to be able to adhere to those expectations. And
Yes,
if any, in
exactly.
any chance, even exceed them. So I think that that's great. So Judy, we are coming up on kind of the end of our conversation, but is there anything you want to ask me? I'm going to put myself out there to see if there's anything you might want to put out there, or anything that you want to kind of acknowledge and bring out there before we wrap up.
Let's start with you first. The question I would have for you is, could you give, without totally giving away, spoiler alert, but why you think, I think I have an idea, but tell us why you think Dominion works for today. Why is the book you think is going to be the summer read in
Uh-huh.
2025?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. Well, to tell you the truth, I think that it is definitely a story that is for today. Um, I'm not giving away anything by saying this is a matriarchal society. And I think, within the context of, recent things that have happened, the overturn of Roe v. Wade, even the opposition with respect to DE&I, which includes women's, ability to make the same wage, get promotions, etc. So it impacts, a number of people, but it also impacts women to a large degree. So I think this whole issue of women and the degree in which they can impact and drive the type of societal outcomes that we really are looking for today, I think that's one part of it.
Mhm.
But I think the other part of it is, honestly, is there is Dominion is also about the relationship between a mother and a daughter. I think one of the most common but really emotional things that I think women really do have to manage is the relationship that they have with their mom. Is my mom going to allow me to grow up and be an adult, or will she always see me as a child? And there's just so many other things that we struggle with: mother's expectations versus your own expectations. How do you balance them? And so I think that there's an emotional undertone for the lead in this particular story, which is incredibly important. But also the the whole area around love. What does love look like 50 years into the future? Relationships, the way people engage. That's another huge part of this story as well. And
Mhm.
within the midst of all of that, there's rebellion, intrigue, deception. And, one of the things I really love, at least I like to do, is I like a really good paced novel. I like it to move fast when it needs to move fast, slow it down. When I want to drop a few bombs along the way, I'm going to do that. But I think at the end of the day, I think that there's going to be a lot of talk about what the different themes of this story are. And it's going to be a lot of, you know, desire to engage and really get involved in how we, as a society, can really imagine what the balance of power can be between men and women, and many other areas of balance within our society. So I'm really excited about it, and it's a fun novel. It's a great read, and there's a lot of action and adventure, love, and all the wonderful things that when you put it all together, it's just a magnificent gumbo.
Well, man, this is going about with a purpose. What I like what you said is that it's a universal story, and I
Yeah,
think again, what I talk about in my course is the importance of writing stories that sometimes you do speak to a culture at a certain time, and I think that's excellent what you're saying. In books, I do, in film and other works of art, they do fit a lot of times the moment, and we
hmm,
are in a moment of history, and so something like that would be excellent. Mine, I say, would do the same, particularly probably book four, but it deals with some of the dark side of religion, and I think we're
mm,
getting a lot of that too. Some of the focus or the desire to control.
yeah,
So so universal stories that it can apply to current circumstances. That's how they get their legs for generations, because of the fact that it became every man and every woman could dive in some place. And then you said something else that was powerful. That then within that general scheme of the book, it is also the relationship of mother and daughter. I know
yeah,
there's something very similar in mine where it's a man who didn't want to be king. Many of us are running away from what we are to be. So when you have those kind of elements in your stories, that's what makes them worthy of being kept on the shelf and being read and more and more by other folks. So excellent. I look forward to it. It's going to be the book of 2025.
I love it. I love it, Judy. So, again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was really an exciting time, I think, to bring Judy here, and I'm so glad she was able to join. And I also want to just quickly kind of show you. Um, oh, I'm almost there. And of course, this would happen. My orientation is off. Let me try this. Ah, and this is a little small, but let me maximize it and expand it. Okay. Okay, guys, what I will end up doing, just because we do have to close out, is I will end up actually dropping the links to J. Ellis into the chat. So if you want to check out Judy's work, you can purchase that on Amazon.com, and you can also pre-order. So I think these are all great ways to kind of get ahead of it and find out a little bit more. So again, thank you so much for joining,
Thank
and this has been
you.
pleasure.
It was awesome. All the best. Congratulations on your debut novel. All the best.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.